The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Yes.
Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, God of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee, hail thee as the sun above. Melt the clouds of sin and sadness, drive the pain of doubt away. Giver of immortal gladness, fill us with the joy of day. All thy works with joy surround the earth, and heaven reflect thy rays. Stars and planets sing around thee, center of unbroken praise. Field and forest, vale and mountain, blossoming meadow, flashing sea, chanting bird and fountain, call us to rejoice in thee. Thou art giving and forgiving, ever blessing, ever blessed, wellspring of the joy of living, ocean depth of happy rest. Ever singing, march we onward, victors in the midst of strife. Joyful music lifts us onward in the triumph song of life.
Good morning. My name is Linda Leibel, and I serve as your president this year on the Board of Trustees of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spartanburg. Thanks for joining us via live stream this morning. In cooperation with the global and national health authorities, we suspended all in-person church activities for the time. Many people have found that covenant groups are a valuable way to stay connected to our church community during this time of social distancing. There's small 6 to 10 people groups who are led by a lead trainer on a Zoom to discuss certain topics. The lessons coordinated with the monthly sermon topics. This is the time of year that we add new groups and new members. Plans are being made to have one new daytime and one evening group. Please contact Marilyn Coltrane if you're interested. Come make the church neighborhood look great. We're going to pick up litter on Saturday, August 22nd at 8 a.m. You meet at the small park at the bottom of the hill on Converse Street. It's a perfect outdoor service project. Wear a mask and spread out through the neighborhood. Bring your mask, gloves, and grabber sticks, and the trash bags are provided. The early morning start will help beat the heat. Our care for one another and for the community only becomes more important in times like these. I encourage you to visit our website, uucs.org, for ways you can join in our work. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of our board members or any member on staff. It's our job to serve you. We're glad that you've taken the time to connect with us this morning, especially in times like these. We need each other. Thanks for being part of the congregation today. We are a people of faith and hope. Call your family and friends. Make sure they're doing okay. Wear your masks. We will welcome back Scott Neely today also. Welcome.
Good morning. It is wonderful to be here with you this morning, even virtually. It is wonderful to be back in this space and to re-enter the routine of gathering and of service that is the life of this congregation. And I want to say thank you to you Thank you for having me, for welcoming me back. Not always a given. And thank you for the time away that you offer ministers of this congregation, that you offer me. It is a gift. I know the lives of ministers in other congregations. I hear about the work of my colleagues, and I know the very rare gift that you afford me and my predecessors to take time in the summer to rest, to study, to reconnect with family and with the deepest things of life so that we can do this work together. And that is what the last weeks have been for me, a time for me with my family to reset, to try to establish a better pattern, a deeper pattern of work and of life so that we are ready for what lies ahead, for what is already happening here, for the work that we are about to do and the work that we have already begun. If you know what has happened here in this congregation over this summer, even if only in part, in our service to this community, in mask making and distribution, in the work of advocacy during a pandemic, in hospitality for those living with addiction during this pandemic, in organizing for voting justice, in the work of consciousness, in our depth of learning together, in spirituality, in freedom of thought and freedom of spirit, and freedom to push ourselves in worship, in art, in creativity, and public art, in a time of national crisis, in community witness. If you know what has happened here in this congregation this summer, even if only in part, I want to ask you to stop for just a moment and breathe. Bring to mind all that you know has happened here in a time when we are meant to be at rest. All that has happened here. Breathe with gratitude. Breathe with purpose. Breathe because we have already begun and we are about to do so much more. Breathe with power. And if you do not know all that has happened here over the summer, in whole or in part, and if you are in this group of people, then you and I are in company together, because I have been away, and there is very much that I do not know about what has happened in this congregation this summer. There is always so much that is beyond me that I do not know. So much that this congregation is doing. Still, breathe. Breathe with us. Be here now with us and breathe. You are a part of this energy. Something is happening here of which we are all a part and which is greater than us all, and which is for us all, and which is amazing. Thank you for being here today. I am very glad to be here with you. Welcome.
I'm Judy Allen, your worship associate this morning. I am so happy to be here and to be a part of this thriving congregation. I read from the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, ratified August 18th, 1920. For that to happen, Action was needed. Action was needed. Written for the Hyde Park, Massachusetts Historical Society by Patrice Gatozzi and Peter Brown. In March 1870, 50 years before the 19th Amendment granted women citizens in the United States the right to vote, a bold group of women from Hyde Park voted in a local election. Their march and vote was the first in Massachusetts, and the publicity it garnered would galvanize many more across the country. Angelina Grimke Weld and her sister Sarah Grimke, who actively fought for abolitionism, had moved to Hyde Park after the Civil War. After the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, the sisters focused their activism on securing rights, both political and social, for women. In January 1870, the Massachusetts Women's Suffrage Association was founded, and the Grimke sisters were elected as vice presidents. In February of that year, Lucy Stone gave a powerful lecture in Hyde Park, and a discussion followed featuring the Grimke sisters and Theodore Weld. The group present determined that action was needed. They would lead the women of Hyde Park not only to organize and speak out for women's suffrage, but to vote in an upcoming local election. On Monday, March 7th, 1870, a group of approximately 50 women, including the Grimke sisters and Sarah M. Stewart, turned out on Election Day and cast their votes. The votes were placed in a separate box, and local officials did not count the women's ballots. But women's collective action, showing up and voting, brought widespread attention to their demands for political rights. It also helped inspire another generation of women to continue the fight.
A band of women, and 2 our men are born, emerging from the darkness past and looking toward the morn. Their mother labored, waited through a night without a star. The morning shows the suffrage flag that bears the woman's star. Hurrah, hurrah, for equal rights, hurrah, hurrah, for the suffrage flag that bears the woman's star. This stands for all reforms, war shall be at an end. Bayonets and swords shall rust, we'll use the brain, the pen. Laden with precious freight now thunders on the progress car. At the headlight waves the suffrage flag that bears the woman's star. Hurrah, hurrah, for equal rights, hurrah, hurrah, for the suffrage flag that bears the woman's star. The ship of state for ages was guided by starlight, till the cluster in our flag almost dispelled the night. 'Tis Freedom's Day, our flag shall be a sun no night can mar. We'll add the light of the suffrage flag that bears the woman's star. Hurrah, hurrah, for equal rights, hurrah, hurrah, for the suffrage flag that bears the woman's star. Thus evolves the greatest triumph of dual human race. Church and state, the home and school and law and love embrace. We'll have a perfect nation, we'll march from near and far, to glory neath the stars and stripes that shall bear the woman's star. Hurrah, hurrah, for equal rights, hurrah, hurrah, for the stars and stripes that shall bear the woman's star. Hurrah, shall bear the woman's star.
If you know the words of our covenant, say them with me at this time. If you don't know them, listen mindfully to the meaning of the promises we make. We are a people of faith and hope. Together we covenant to strive to become our better selves, to honor both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to respond to systems of violence and oppression with the power of a love beyond belief. Normally, at this time in our service, we would honor our joys and concerns by placing a stone or a shell in our rippling water bowl. Instead, use this time of silence to reflect on your own joys and concerns, and to reach out to others, knowing that they too have both joys and sorrows to be acknowledged and addressed.
In April of this year, as the pandemic worsened, our congregation responded to our partners in the Alianza Spartanburg, formerly the Hispanic Alliance, and in the Pasos Spartanburg office, asking for support for Latinx immigrants in Spartanburg County who would not receive federal assistance during the worsening pandemic and the financial crisis it has caused. Gifts continue to come in support of this fund. Even now, months past, people in this congregation and beyond this congregation are going to our website and making gifts to support our neighbors in this county, in this community. To date, we have raised more than $26,000 to support Latinx immigrants in Spartanburg County. When I stepped away in June, I shared with you, just as I was leaving, that a coalition was forming, a statewide coalition at the behest of several philanthropies, to try to replicate this same action on a statewide level. The question was, could we organize to support Latinx immigrants across the state during the pandemic? And every week this summer, we and our partners have met virtually, organizing, talking, working with lawyers, working with our board, working with other boards, developing a way for multiple organizations to come together to apply for funding and to support Latinx immigrants across our state. we have now raised over $97,000 in grants to provide support for Latinx immigrants throughout South Carolina. That coalition has coalesced, and our work has begun. Our mask-making team has been relentless. They have now made over 2,500 masks for distribution across our region and in states on the other side of our country. Carloads and carloads and carloads of food have been donated and gathered for people who are in a hunger crisis because of the mismanagement of our public health crisis. Energy and time and thinking and relationships have been poured out and developed and reworked and struggled with to wrestle with each other week in and week out, to listen to each other, to disagree with each other, to give each other space and voice and truth, to speak with as much honesty and kindness as we are able with each other, to encourage with each other, to find how we as a people, we as a congregation, can serve our community and our nation during this time. And do we ever serve? I want to invite you to go to our website, www.uucs.org, to scroll beneath this live stream to the Help button. Click on the Help button and look at all the ways that you can join in this service, in the work of this congregation. At the very bottom of that page, you will find ways that you can give. To give financially, to give in non-financial ways. Our gifts of time and energy and honesty, of truthfulness and encouragement, all the resources that we can pour out to join together to make a difference in our world. And are we ever doing it? I am so proud to be a part of this work, to see what we have done, to see how far it moves beyond us already, to know what we are about to do. We're going to enter into a time of silence for reflection and for centering, to feel our power individually and as a team, as a congregation, to feel our connection, to feel our purpose. And from this silence, from this centering, from this center of our shared power and gratitude and connection with each other across all distances and purpose, from this silent center of shared power, we bring our gifts. in broadcast media and in television. Times of silence and inactivity are called dead air time. They are anathema. And for me, it is a moment of endless delight that for us, silence is exactly the opposite. It is energized and alive time. That is how upside down we are. And that is a small metaphor for the immense power that we bring this world. Thank you for sharing silence together. The 19th Amendment. I asked my daughter for permission to share this story with you. We had a number of conversations before we arrived at an agreement. And so I want to begin today by thanking her for allowing me to tell this story. Thank you for hearing it. I want to thank her for the strength of her voice, for speaking her perspective and her mind, for challenging me and pushing me to help me see things in a different way, and for allowing me to tell this. My daughter, who is 9 and will enter 4th grade tomorrow, my daughter and I were watching last Sunday's service. I've studiously watched all of the services this Sunday with great admiration and with great gratitude, great happiness. And my daughter and I were watching last Sunday's service. Palma Eisner was the worship associate, and Palma stood up and said, "Mary Miles is meant to be our speaker today, long-term member of this congregation twice over and long-time servant leader in this congregation and in this community and this entire UU denomination nationally and in many agencies and many causes around the country throughout the course of her life. Mary Miles was meant to speak with us about the abolitionist and the suffrage leader, the great hero of our nation, Susan B. Anthony. But Mary has exceeded herself as always, and rather than speak about Susan B. Anthony herself, Mary has actually invited Susan B. Anthony to come and talk with us today. And my daughter, who does not miss a beat, let me tell you, whipped around and looked at me square in the face and said, "Wait a minute, I thought she was dead. How did y'all get her?" Wow, wow, wow. The services this summer have been amazing. Amazing meditations every single Sunday, straight through the summer. One building upon the next, a momentum building. Could feel it through the screen. I was trying to tune this church out as best I could, and every Sunday I could feel it. I could feel one person working with the next, building from their energy, building from their ideas, building from those stories, building a story for us, something that we can work with to propel us forward. The interconnectedness was real and symbolic and profound. We started with Dr. Mel Fritchie, a superhero herself, invoking the superheroes in our lives, heroes from across the multiverse, who out of their wounds serve with power to heal the world. And the promise and the examples that every one of us can wear the mask. Literally, we can wear the mask and be a hero. Every one of us has power to reshape the world, to make it a better and more livable place. Every one of us can step forward as a superhero. The very fact of our failures, which we will hear about again today, the very fact of our wounds, and even the wounds that we ourselves have inflicted, no matter what we have done, the wounds themselves carry for us a power, if we will only choose it, to change the world. And then we moved into a month of UU women heroes, from the mythic to the real, the Peabody sisters, who reformed education in this country, shared with us by a reforming educator herself, Robin Carter. Florence Nightingale, who reshaped not only nursing, but the whole field of Western medicine in wartime, advancing the cause of life, just the right to live, to receive competent and scientifically based and well-executed treatment. And can we not see the critical importance of that in this very moment today? How completely relevant her work remains today. And a nurse who has lived this and is living it now, Ruth Stanton, is the very person who told us the story. Dorothea Dix's advocacy across 2 continents for those who are literally in chains, living in the filth of our society, locked away because of mental illness. Therapist and healer Mary Underwood brought the work of Dorothea Dix and the inherent dignity and value of every person's life, the gifts even that the pain of behavioral health and mental illness bring if we will only see them, bringing to light a whole reversal of worldview, to liberate us all, to live in greater kinship with one another, in deeper and truer and more honest interconnectedness. And warrior Stacey Jackson, what other word could describe her? Warrior for peace and justice, speaking to us about Thandeka, woman of blessing, who calls for effective intelligence, emotional intelligence in our lives and in our worship and in our relationships, so that how we feel and how we love guides us, that we don't only speak the words, love beyond belief, but that we live them. A call to us all to our better selves, our truer selves, our fullest selves. And then this month, building from superheroes to real UU women heroes to the heroic movement of the 19th Amendment, the women's suffrage movement, and the 100th anniversary of the ratification of women's right to vote in this country. Dr. Melissa Walker came and spoke with us about the history and the complexity and the proximity right here in Spartanburg, on Plume and Connecticut streets, at the Episcopal Church of the Advent, and all around us to revitalize and revive the women's suffrage movement in South Carolina, a movement that Mary Miles literally embodied, speaking in the voice of Susan B. Anthony, her presentation pulsing with the remarkable power of that woman's life, her dedication to work, her conception of religion as work, as service, service as worship. The power of one life to reshape a nation. It has been an amazing summer. Wow, wow, wow. The preparation, the dedication, the engagement of heart and mind to offer us this story, this narrative, this legacy of which we are inheritors, in which we stand to write the next chapter. That is the story we have been given all summer long, from myth to the real, to summon us through the stories of these heroines, to step into our own lives, our own stories, to continue and expand their work. Throughout all of this, there has been a major theme, a theme compelling and profound, a theme that has dwelt with me every day this summer and that has urged me to reshape my life. a theme that we see in the life of every one of the people, every one of the heroes, every one of the women that we have heard about. Freedom of mind and freedom of spirit. Whether as Quakers or as Unitarians, as Universalists, or just as people, freedom of mind and freedom of spirit empowers us with the freedom to act. And that freedom, the freedom to think and imagine a different world, it may lead us to be persecuted, to be kicked out, to be misunderstood, but it is effective. It works. And that is our inheritance, to be free to imagine and think and enact a world that we know is possible, to take it from imagination and myth and to make it real, as these women before us have done. Wow, wow, wow. I want to offer just a moment of gratitude to ask you in your mind and heart, with all the effective intelligence that you can summon at the behest of Stacey Jackson and Tendeka, a moment of gratitude, of love beyond belief for these lives of which we have heard all summer, and for the tradition of freedom of which we are a part. They summon us. We are summoned. My daughter and I listened to Mary's meditation in the voice, embodying Susan B. Anthony. And when we had listened, my daughter turned to me and she said, "Wow." She was right. You could feel the energy of Susan B. Anthony's life come through the meditation. It was an incredible experience. Wow. And then again, without missing a beat. Wow. So when are y'all going to have Rosa Parks? Now that is hilarious. And you can see the pride on my face. And it is very on point. Our words often speak more wisdom than we know. Because the words that my daughter spoke, "Wow, Susan B. Anthony, when are y'all gonna have Rosa Parks?" is very historically accurate. Because the suffrage movement, a powerful and profound and revolutionary movement, was a flawed movement, powerful and incomplete. People of color, and particularly women of color, were very often left out, put aside, told to stand behind, left out, often deliberately and explicitly, and sometimes violently. In the history of this movement, and in the story that we have inherited and told and retold and made into our history, things were said and things were done, even by our greatest heroes, particularly by Susan B. Anthony, that are simply abhorrent. There is a moment in this movement in which a deliberate strategy was chosen, a strategy to compromise with racist norms in order to fight patriarchy, but to allow explicit racism to continue. That is what happened. It is complex, it is terrible, and it is true. What can we learn from it? What can this movement and its very real achievement show us about our own work, about the level of work which we are capable when we look at the lives of these people, of this movement, of these women? We are challenged to think about the level of work we are capable of as well, about the genuine power within us the heroic power within us, and of what we are up against in our nation and in our world and in ourselves. What can we learn from this movement about our capacity and the challenge we face around us and within us, so that we learn from the absolute successes and the undeniable failures of these heroes in whose legacy we stand. We have a dual and complex inheritance, and the full truth of us is a great gift. If we accept the gift, we can go far. Next week, we will delve into the complex and challenging and necessary movement for voting rights that has characterized our democracy from its very beginning. This week, we celebrate. We celebrate the achievement of the 19th Amendment, ratified on August 18th, 1920, 100 years ago this Tuesday. And today, in celebration, I want to ask us to focus on this law, whose passage and ratification we celebrate. The 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." What can this law itself teach us? First, it is a monumental victory. We must bring to mind how far we have come and the immense and dangerous effort to get there. Consider the change in women's rights from the inception of this movement in the early 19th century, the early 1800s, until the passage and ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920 to the time today. I am not saying everything is fixed, far from it, and we will deal with that with ardor next week. But consider how much changed in women's rights over the course of that time period. From being treated as property to being able to own property outright. From being denied education to having the right to education. From being denied custody of children in a divorce. Women were denied custody of their children in the event of divorce. Children went by default to the husband. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine it? To having equal standing under the law. Imperfectly, with huge problems, but huge movement. Think of the labor, the slander endured, the violence, the strategy, the persistence. The movement that led to the 19th Amendment was a monumental effort, and its ratification was a monumental victory. Abigail Adams, writing to her husband John Adams in 1776, at the very beginning of our nation, during the writing of the Declaration of Independence, Abigail Adams wrote to him in a letter, "In the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." The Constitution written at the beginning of our nation did not heed the words of Abigail Adams. And the 19th Amendment, more than a century later, marked a critical milestone in the revolution, the rebellion that she promised her husband if he didn't listen, and he did not. The 19th Amendment is absolutely a revolutionary moment, a critical milestone in the revolution of women's rights in this country and in our world, in philosophy, in method, and in outcome. And this is a monumental achievement. Second, that this victory is monumental should concern us. Why should it require a new law for women to have the right to vote in our democracy? In this moment of celebration, we should ask ourselves, why should that be? Turn the light back on ourselves. Let the fireworks and the spotlights, the lights of cameras, the candles and flames that we light in vigil and in celebration, let that light cast itself back on ourselves. Turn to see ourselves more clearly and the nature of the nation we have created and in which we live and which it is ours to now further create. I do not mean this naively. I know our history. I know what patriarchy is. I mean it sincerely. I mean it so that we see how often, in the name of our highest ideals, we choose and choose again and choose again self-interest and exploitation for ourselves against shared power and the common good. Fights over the 14th Amendment that split the suffrage movement and the early civil rights movement. The way that racism emerged and took hold within many branches of the suffrage movement. These are not just things to be criticized. We need to see them for what they are. We need to not cover them up. And we need to look at them carefully. Because even as terrible as they are, rather than falling into blame, they can be for us a light, a terrible light of truth, to reveal to us how our nation is constructed and who is in power and remains in power, and how deep those structures of unjust power go, and how difficult it is to change that. That abolitionists and early advocates for civil rights and the suffragists found themselves fighting with each other and choosing against each other highlights the greater structure of power that was pressing down on all of them. And that, above all, the intense pressure to compromise with that is what we need to see. That has not gone away. The Grimke sisters and Susan B. Anthony marched to the polls. They marched to vote, and they were jeered at and threatened and arrested for exercising their rights as citizens of the United States. They should have been able to exercise that right without a new amendment. But a new amendment to our Constitution was required to ensure that right on the basis of gender. Why would our great democracy require that of half of our population? It's a question that we need to ask sincerely. Why? Why is so much turmoil and strife, such monumental effort necessary just to secure the basic promises of our Constitution? Third, The 19th Amendment is incomplete. It was not complete on August 18th, 1920, and it is not complete today. Legal scholars who study voting rights and who discuss the 19th Amendment, who study the ways in which the movement for women's rights and civil rights split, and then split further within itself over methodology and strategy, over greater goals. The splitting of the movements before and after the passage of the 19th Amendment, by the estimation of many, has weakened the application of the 19th Amendment. What many of these scholars call for is for the 14th Amendment and the 19th Amendment to be joined. They were split, and it caused further divisions, and it has weakened their application. They must be joined. Women of color and most people of color, Black and indigenous and of Asian descent, were still disenfranchised in 1920. Still disenfranchised until the Voting Rights Act of 1964 was passed. In large part, this is because so much of our right to vote rests in the hands of states. You can see that in the language of the 19th Amendment as well. How important it is to identify that states cannot deny the right to vote on the basis of sex, gender. Many states in the North and West had already secured women's right to vote before 1920, some long before it. Even some people of color in those states had secured the right to vote. But poll taxes and literacy tests and Jim Crow laws very effectively disenfranchised voters of color until decades later. And we can see today outright efforts to disenfranchise voters still. The President of the United States explicitly stated this as something he is trying to do this week in front of all of our national media. This week. In a democracy, voting is about power. And in a democracy, there are those who will always try to limit and take away that power for their own benefit. The 19th Amendment is not a conclusion, and its failures are not fatal. They are not final. It is a launching point, if we will see it for what it is, a launching point for the ongoing work in a democracy, the endless work of securing the power of the vote for every person. That is what we are called to by the 19th Amendment. To see what it did, the monumental success and effort and incompleteness that it offers, and to take up the summons to continue the work. Because the transformation that it effected is real. It is real. What it did is real for our nation and for ourselves. Consider me. Think of who I am now, offering this meditation right here in this moment at a church that will celebrate a mural dedicated to the Grimke sisters and all who worked with them, before them and after them, on the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment this Tuesday. Consider me and who I am as I stand before you today, a white man in the United States. Who I am now is very likely not who I would have been 100 years ago this Tuesday. This movement and this law changed us all, collectively and individually, profoundly. It taught us a little more about shared power, which is the fundamental principle of democracy, that we all hold power and must preserve it for one another and share it. that sharing power makes us all better. And so I stand here in the complexity of this movement and the history of our nation, in celebration of the real transformation that was worked, and that we can mark this Tuesday with the 100th anniversary of this amendment. I stand here as a white man in this country with gratitude, enormous gratitude, for the lives these heroes lived. Heroes like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and the Grimke sisters. Heroes like Ida B. Wells and Maria Stewart and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and Mary Church Terrell. For the lives these heroes lived and the suffering they endured and the transformation they wrought even when they were at odds with each other. The transformation that they wrought even when they hurt each other. The transformation that they wrought for us all, in us all. These women strove at enormous risk to themselves, beyond the span of their own mortality. Many of them did not leave to see the monumental achievement that is their success. They strove for something worthy of their heroic lives. And that is what they call us to stand in their story, to stand in their legacy, to receive from them the pulsing power of their lives, to feel it with all of our effective intelligence. The power of their lives still pulsing today. I thought they were dead. How did we get to be with them? To feel the pulsing power of their lives embodied in us today. Them sharing their power with us. Because that is democracy. Shared power for us all, without compromise, without end, forever.
We'll build a land where we bind up the
There is now awakened Sarah Grimke, writing in 1857. But there is now awakened in woman a consciousness that she is defrauded of her legitimate rights and that she never can fulfill her mission until she is placed in that position to which she feels herself called by the divinity within. In 1920, women achieved the right to vote. 2020, we work to preserve voting rights for all of our citizens. Wake up, sit up, rise up, clean up, dress up, grow up, show up, stand up, speak up, but never give up.